What happens when one of Hollywood's most loved stars finally loses his patience with one of television's most unshakable hosts? When Jason Momoa and Whoopi Goldberg sit face to face on The View, what begins as a light-hearted chat turns into a live showdown that no one, not even the producers, could stop. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. It's a raw clash of pride, truth, and conviction that left America speechless. And trust me, this talk show won't disappoint you. It'll be worth every second of your time. The studio lights hit Jason Momoa as he walked onto the set of The View. The crowd erupted, the kind of applause that makes the walls hum. He smiled, big and easy, the signature grin that always makes people believe they're about to have a good time. He waved, thanked the audience, and took his seat across from Whoopi Goldberg. For a moment, everything felt smooth, the laughter, the cheers, the light banter between co-hosts. But under that laughter, something felt slightly off. Whoopi's eyes held a flicker of something sharper. She leaned forward, her voice smooth but edged. "Aquaman's saving the world again," she said with a small smirk. "Between designer photo ops?" The audience laughed. It sounded playful, but Jason caught the sting underneath. He smiled back, but the warmth in it was gone. "Better photo ops than fake compassion," he said casually, keeping his tone light. Whoopi tilted her head, pretending to laugh, but her eyes didn't. There was a split second of silence before Joy tried to keep the energy alive with a quick chuckle. Joy Behar leaned in with her usual teasing grin, trying to keep the mood light. "Jason, you've been everywhere lately," she said. "Movies, campaigns, charities, your water brand. Do you ever take a day off, or are you secretly trying to save the planet all by yourself?" The audience laughed, and Jason smiled humbly, his voice calm and grounded. "I'm just doing what I can, Joy. I love this planet, and if I can use my platform to make a difference, even a small one, I'll keep doing it." His tone was sincere, but before he could finish, Whoopi's voice cut through, flat and precise. "You preach saving the planet," she said, tilting her head, "yet you burn jet fuel like coffee." The audience's laughter died almost instantly. Jason's grin froze, the warmth draining from his face. He turned toward her slowly, his voice lowering just a notch. "So caring's invalid if you can afford airfare?" "That's interesting logic." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through the air. Whoopi didn't blink, her expression unreadable. For a long beat, neither of them moved. Jason's easy charm was gone, replaced by something colder, more focused. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her smirk spreading like she already knew she'd won the round. "It's not logic, Jason," she said slowly, her voice carrying that edge that could cut through velvet. "It's integrity. You don't get to preach virtue while swimming in luxury. Don't sell virtue if you rent excess." Jason's jaw tightened. He gave a small laugh, the kind that wasn't friendly at all. "That's rich," he said, leaning forward. "You sit here judging everyone from $1 million studio and call it morality. You sell truth from a script, Whoopi. Which one's worse, pretending to save the world or pretending to understand it?" The audience let out a nervous hum, the kind of sound that fills the air when people aren't sure if they should laugh or hold their breath. Whoopi's smirk didn't fade, it sharpened. "Careful, Aquaman," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You might drown in your own ego." Jason's eyes narrowed, his voice low and steady. "And you might choke on your own self-righteousness." The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Joy's nervous voice broke in, "Oh boy." But Whoopi raised a hand, cutting her off without looking away. "No, let him talk. I'm curious how deep this ocean of hypocrisy goes." Jason tilted his head slightly, a flicker of a grin forming. "Deep enough to spot the anchors pulling people like you down." That line hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Whoopi's eyes locked on his, unblinking. The audience was dead silent now. No laughter, no movement. Just two people, staring across the table, and everyone in that studio knew it wasn't just a talk show anymore. It was a duel, and neither one was stepping back. Whoopi leaned forward, elbows on the table, her smile gone. "You're Hollywood's favorite eco-poster," she said, her tone cutting like a knife. "You pose with ocean trash for the cameras, then fly home on a private jet. You preach sustainability with a water bottle that costs more than rent. Tell me, Jason, how many plastic bottles does it take to build a brand?" The audience gave a nervous laugh that died before it could settle. Jason's face hardened. His voice dropped, deep and sharp, carrying that dangerous calm that comes right before someone loses patience. "You researched my flaws more than my causes," he said slowly. "That says plenty." Whoopi didn't blink. "It says I do my job," she shot back. Jason leaned closer, his tone tightening like a pulled string. "No," he said, his voice steady but sharp enough to sting. "It says you forgot what your job is. You're supposed to have conversations, not conduct cross-examinations." Whoopi's eyebrows rose, a spark of amusement flickering in her eyes. "Oh, so now the movie star wants to teach me how to interview?" Jason's expression didn't change. "No, just how to listen." The words hit like a punch. The tension was thick enough to taste, the kind that made even the crew behind the cameras hold their breath. For a brief second, Whoopi looked like she wanted to fire back again, but she didn't. She just smiled, that tight, dangerous smile that promised she wasn't done yet. Whoopi's eyes narrowed, her voice calm but heavy with challenge. "Maybe you're just uncomfortable with honesty," she said, her tone deliberate, like she wanted every word to sting. Jason's jaw flexed. He stared at her for a long moment, then leaned forward slightly, his voice low, sharp, and steady. "No," he said. "I'm uncomfortable with arrogance disguised as wisdom." The sentence hit like a slap, not loud, not dramatic, but lethal in its precision. The audience gasped as the air inside the studio seemed to change, charged with something electric and dangerous. Whoopi blinked once, her smile twitching but not breaking. "That's cute," she said softly, her voice dripping sarcasm. "Aquaman schooling me on humility." Jason didn't flinch. "You've made a career out of calling it honesty, but all I see is someone too proud to admit when they're wrong." That shut the room down completely. Joy turned her head toward the control booth, whispering out of the corner of her mouth, "Cut to commercial?" But no one moved. The producers didn't dare. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a collision, and both of them were steering straight into it. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her expression cold and measured. Jason didn't look away. Jason sat back in his chair, took a breath, and let the tension settle before speaking. His tone was calm, but every word carried a quiet force. "You say you stand for voices," he said slowly, eyes locked on Whoopi. "But every time someone disagrees with you, you drown them out. You don't amplify voices, Whoopi. You filter them." The room went still. Whoopi tilted her head, the faintest hint of a sneer tugging at her lip. "This is the view, Jason," she replied coolly. "People watch to hear our opinions. That's the point." Jason nodded once, but his smile was thin, sharp. "Exactly," he said. "Your opinions. Not the truth." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling through the silence. The audience didn't make a sound, no clapping, no murmuring, nothing. It was the kind of quiet that comes when people realize they're watching something they weren't supposed to see. Whoopi's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened, the polite host mask starting to crack. For a single heartbeat, even the cameras seemed to hesitate, their red lights flickering like they knew they were catching something raw and unedited. Jason didn't look away. He just sat there, calm, unshaken, letting the silence do the rest of the talking. Jason's eyes stayed locked on Whoopi, his tone tightening into steel. "You've spent years preaching respect," he said, voice steady. "But today, you're proving how little you actually give it." The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Whoopi leaned forward, her calm finally cracking, voice rising enough to cut through the room. You don't get to come on my show and lecture me, Jason. You're here as a guest. Remember that her words came sharp, meant to reassert control, but Jason didn't blink. His voice dropped lower, quieter, the kind of tone that makes people lean in instead of back away. Then maybe, he said, it's time someone finally did. That single line snapped something in the room. The audience exploded, half cheering, half booing, the kind of chaos that rattled the stage. Whoopi's jaw tightened, her hand twitching toward her mug like she needed something to hold on to. Jason didn't move. He just sat there, completely still, his eyes never leaving hers. You wanted honesty, he added, his voice cutting through the noise. Now you've got it. Whoopi tried to answer, but her words tangled behind a bitter laugh. You've got some nerve, she managed. Jason leaned in, calm as ever. No, he said. Just a memory. The crowd gasped again, torn between awe and discomfort. There was no middle ground left. The line had been crossed, and both of them knew there was no going back. Jason pushed back from his chair, the scrape of it against the floor echoing through the dead silence. His hands moved slowly, deliberate, unclipping the mic from his shirt as his eyes stayed fixed on Whoopi. I came here for truth, he said, his voice calm but cutting. Not theater. For a moment, no one moved. Then Whoopi snapped, her voice rising with irritation she couldn't hide. Then don't audition, she shot back, her tone sharp enough to sting. Jason stopped mid-step and turned his head toward her. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than rage. Truth doesn't need an audition, he said quietly. It needs courage. The line landed like a hammer. The audience gasped, that kind of collective intake of breath that says everyone knows they just witnessed something real. Whoopi froze in her seat, lips pressed together, trying to hold on to her composure. Jason gave her one last look, not defiant, not smug, just final, then turned and walked off the stage. His footsteps were the only sound in the studio. The camera lights still burned, but nobody spoke. Even joy didn't dare break the silence. The crowd sat frozen, unsure if they'd just seen a meltdown or a man finally take a stand. The cameras were still rolling when a murmur rippled through the audience. A shift, a sudden intake of breath. Whoopi glanced toward the edge of the stage, mid-sentence, and froze. Jason Momoa had returned. He was already walking toward the table, his shoulders squared, expression unreadable. Joy whispered under her breath, "He's back." But her voice barely carried over the tension building in the room. Whoopi straightened in her chair, trying to keep her composure. Jason stopped center stage, no mic, no smile, just presence. "I'm not letting you rewrite that moment," he said firmly. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of weight that made everyone in the room pay attention. Whoopi's lips tightened. "Jason," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "this segment's over." Jason shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said, "because what you call passion, I call disrespect." The crowd went completely still. Each word came like a strike, slow, precise, impossible to deflect. Whoopi opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Jason didn't let her. "You can cut the cameras, edit the tape, spin your message," he said, his voice steady. "But the truth doesn't need your permission to exist." For the first time all morning, Whoopi looked caught off guard, not angry, just momentarily exposed. Jason took a step closer to the table, not in aggression, but conviction. Every eye in the studio was locked on him now. Even Whoopi, known for her control, couldn't find a line sharp enough to break the moment. Jason's voice softened, but the tension in the room didn't ease. It just shifted. "I grew up with nothing," he said quietly, eyes locked on Whoopi. "Now that I have something, I try to give back. And you mock that like it's a crime." The words didn't come from anger anymore. They came from somewhere deeper, rawer. Whoopi's expression flickered. For the first time since he sat down, her edge dulled. Her voice came out lower, almost hesitant. Maybe I went too far. Jason nodded once, his tone even but resolute. That's all I wanted to hear. He turned toward the audience, the lights reflecting off his face, calm now but still burning with conviction. Don't ever let anyone shame you for trying to care, he said, his voice steady, almost like he was speaking directly to the people watching at home. Even when they do it with a smile. The line hit hard. The applause broke like a wave, some loud, some hesitant, but all real. Joy clapped first, Sarah followed, and soon the room was filled with sound. Whoopi didn't move. She just sat there, frozen, her jaw tight, her pride cracked, but her eyes heavy with thought. Jason gave one last nod, then turned and walked off the set, the roar of the audience following him out. As the lights dimmed and the segment ended, Whoopi stared at the table, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe he's right. Sunny looked at her, her tone soft but certain. He is. No one else spoke. Off camera, Jason stood in the hallway, finally letting out the breath he'd been holding since the start. He wasn't calm because he'd won. He was calm because he hadn't backed down. Within hours, clips flooded every platform. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, all of them lit up with the same hashtags. Hashtag Momoa fires back. Hashtag respect the guest. Hashtag Whoopi versus Jason. The moment had left the studio, and there was no taking it back. A few days later, the studio lights came up again, and the view opened with an unusual stillness. Whoopi sat at the center of the table, hands folded, her tone quieter than usual. The laughter, the audience chatter. It was all a little softer that morning. She looked straight into the camera and spoke, her voice calm, stripped of its usual armor. Sometimes, she said, passion sounds like hostility. And sometimes, it's just someone trying to be heard. Jason, if you're watching, I hear you. The words hung in the air, sincere and measured. For once, there was no applause, no reaction, just silence, the kind that means people are listening. Across town, Jason sat in a hotel room overlooking the city. His phone buzzed constantly with headlines, reactions, and messages from people thanking him for speaking up. But he ignored them all. Instead, he opened Instagram, uploaded a black screen with a few simple words. Respect. Always. Aloha. No hashtags, no statements, no follow-ups. Within minutes, the post flooded timelines, and even Whoopi's name trended alongside his again. But this time, not out of outrage. What had started as a clash had turned into something else, a moment that cut through the noise. Commentators called it pride versus principle, ego versus honesty. But for everyone who watched, it wasn't about who won. It was about the fact that one man, sitting under the brightest lights on television, refused to stay quiet when silence would have been easier. The feud became legend, not because of anger, but because Jason Momoa reminded everyone watching that truth, when spoken with conviction, doesn't need to shout to be heard. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Whose side are you on, Jason or Whoopi? Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another explosive moment from television's most unpredictable talk shows. Thanks for watching, and trust me, the next one will hit even harder.